Professor Loeb, mankind has been asking itself a question since its inception. Are we alone in the universe? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's presumptuous of us, it's arrogant to believe that we are alone, that Albert Einstein was the smartest scientist who ever lived since the Big Bang, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun, and just in the Milky Way galaxy there are tens of billions of such stars, and a significant fraction of them, more than 1%, have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So it's very likely that not only we are not alone, that civilizations preceded us by billions of years. And that's enough time for them to send a probe that will reach us by now, because it takes less than a billion years for chemical rockets to traverse the Milky Way galaxy of the type that we sent into interstellar space. So it's not a philosophical question whether we are alone or not. It's not a belief question. It's something that we can explore scientifically. All we need to do is check around us if there are any physical objects that may have been sent a long time ago. And it's just like checking the backyard for, you usually find rocks that are naturally in your backyard, but every now and then you see a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor or something that came from the street. And we haven't done that until recently, until I established the Galileo project, in search for objects that may have been produced technologically by another civilization.
A few years ago, with the detection of the curious asteroid Oumuamua passing through the solar system, your name made headlines internationally due to the controversy surrounding its possible nature as an extraterrestrial spacecraft. What do we know for certain about Oumuamua today, and how are your statements received within the scientific community?
Well, Oumuamua was the first reported interstellar object that came from outside the solar system. We knew that because it was moving too fast to be bound to the sun. And then, of course, the natural assumption was to say, well, maybe it's a rock, the same as we find in the solar system, just came from another star, was ejected from that planetary system. But as time went on, data on it indicated that it's not like the rocks we had seen before. It was flat, most likely in its shape, and it was pushed away from the sun by some force that was mysterious because there was no evaporation, no cometary tail visible around it. So it was not a comet, but also it was pushed away from the sun like a comet. So there was not an asteroid and not a bare rock. And so the question is, what is it and what was the force that was pushing it? And 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii discovered another object that was pushed away from the sun without a cometary tail. It was given the name 2020 SO. And then the astronomers realized soon afterwards that it's actually a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. And it had thin walls. It was made of stainless steel. That's why it didn't evaporate. And because of the thin walls, it had a large surface area for its mass. So it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. And here is an example for an object that we know was produced artificially, technologically, because we produced it, and it behaved like Oumuamua. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? And of course, within the scientific community, there was a lot of pushback against the idea that I suggested, that maybe it's technological, maybe it's a thin object, surface of some bigger object, or actually something else, a light sail. And there was a lot of pushback because most astronomers are used to the idea that everything in the sky is a rock. But I claim that we should be open-minded to new knowledge. And then there were suggestions to explain the push that it exhibited. Some people suggested maybe it's a dust cloud, a dust bunny that has that is very lightweight and is 100 times less dense than air. And it's pushed by reflecting sunlight. And the problem is that such a thing would not survive close to the sun when it gets hot. And there was another suggestion, maybe it's a hydrogen iceberg. and that would not survive in interstellar space because it would evaporate very quickly. Then there was a suggestion maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg, but there is not enough solid nitrogen to make such an iceberg. The idea was that you wouldn't see the evaporation of it. Then there was a suggestion that maybe it's a water iceberg, and the water was dissociated by cosmic rays into hydrogen and oxygen. And there was a problem with the energy balance in that model that we pointed out recently. So altogether, the suggestions made by my colleagues were not viable, that did not explain all the properties of Oumuamua. It remains a puzzle, and we cannot get more data on it. So the way to proceed is to find more objects like it in the future. There is the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile that will find many more. And then we can get more data on them and maybe even get an image when we pass close to such an object. So that's part of the Galileo project that I'm leading. Another part of the Galileo project is to look for meteors, objects that collide with Earth and arrived from interstellar space. And I just returned from an expedition. I'll be glad to tell you more about it. And then the third aspect of the Galileo project is trying to identify the nature of unidentified anomalous phenomena that the US government talks about. We have a telescope that we built at Harvard Observatory that is monitoring the entire sky all the time with infrared, radio, optical, and audio sensors. And we are analyzing the data with artificial intelligence software to figure out whether there are any objects other than birds, natural objects, or other than drones, airplanes, human-made objects. If there is anything from an extraterrestrial origin, then we will examine it in greater detail.
Now that you have mentioned your recent expedition, the next question is regarding that. We know that you have recently completed an expedition in search of fragments from a mysterious meteorite called the IN-1 that crashed off the coast of Papua New Guinea in 2014. Due to its characteristics and approach to our atmosphere, it is believed to have originated from interstellar space. Have you obtained any promising results? What can you tell us about this investigation especially?
Yeah, this is very exciting. Back in 2014, the US government identified the fireball of this meteor, and it was clear that it's moving too fast to be bound to the sun. It was moving faster than the escape speed from the sun, and when we extrapolated 5 years later the velocity of the object, we found that outside the solar system it was moving at 60 kilometers per second relative to the sun, and that's faster than 95% of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. So it was moving really fast. And moreover, the government released the data on the fireball that allowed us to infer that it has material strength larger than all the space rocks that were cataloged by NASA over the past decade, 272 of them. So it was tougher than iron meteorites. And the question is, what is the material composition that it has that makes it so unusual relative to solar system rocks? And the fact that it was moving fast, maybe it benefited from some propulsion, artificial propulsion, and that it was made of unusually tough materials, raised the possibility that it may be technological in origin, because maybe it's made of some alloy, like we are producing steel. And so this, again, is not a philosophical question. We can go there and look for anything left from this object. So that's what we did. I organized an expedition to the Pacific Ocean. It cost $1.5 million, and we had a funder that came forward, and we rented a ship that was fittingly called the Silver Star, and then we built a sled that we dragged over the ocean floor, back and forth over a region of 10 kilometers in size. The sled was roughly a meter wide, and it was 200 kilograms, and it had magnets on both sides. So the magnets attracted any magnetic material on the surface of the ocean. And most of it was volcanic ash, black powder of very tiny particles. Once we filtered those particles using a mesh, we ended up with particles that are bigger than 1/4 millimeter. And when we looked with a microscope at the remaining materials, we saw these beautiful metallic marbles. They had colors of gold, blue, brown, And we realized, based on the composition of these marbles, that they are made mostly of iron and that they are spherules, those droplets that formed out of the melting of the surface of this meteor when it was exposed to the energy of the fireball, which was about a few percent of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. So what we found are the droplets that melted off the surface that fell into the ocean floor almost 10 years ago. And they were millimeter in size, roughly a milligram each. So just think about it. The ocean is 2 kilometers deep, and we surveyed the region, which is 10 kilometers wide, and found these tiny spheres that are 1 millimeter in size, each of them. That's a heroic effort, and I salute the team that accompanied me. They were professionals, the best in their field of ocean expeditions, and we succeeded. We did it. We found those particles, and now we are bringing it back to the laboratories at Harvard University, and we will examine their composition and their structure and try to infer, indeed, that the materials are different than what you find in the solar system. And also, we will check whether we can say something about whether the object was natural, a natural rock, or an artificial object, like a spacecraft. And the other thing is that these spherules provide us with information about where to find any big relic that may have survived the impact. And the next expedition will try to find a bigger piece of the meteor. And that will require a different method, sonar, and we are planning to do that next year.
So, could there be more objects like the IM-1 in other impact locations around the planet that have not been detected? What kind of information could they hold?
Definitely, we already know about another one, which is not far from Portugal, between the Azores and Portugal, and we're planning to go there in a future expedition. And these impacts take place once per decade. So every decade there is an impact of this type, and obviously over the billions of years that the Earth existed, there were, maybe a fraction of a billion such impacts. And so it's a lot of impacts. And the problem is that we can't separate regular meteorites that are from the solar system from interstellar ones without knowing at what speed it was moving prior to the impact. And the only object we had that information that indicated that it's interstellar was this object from 2014, thanks to the US government sensors. And the US government confirmed my assertion with my student Amir Siraj that this is interstellar. They confirmed it at a 99.999% in a letter that they sent to NASA last year. It's unique in the sense that we knew that it came from interstellar space. It's the first object whose materials were held by people. We held it in our hands for the first time in history. We never held materials from a big object that came from outside the solar system before.
Would you say that we are close to finding the long-awaited evidence in any of these interstellar objects that leaves no doubt about their artificial origin?
Well, one thing is clear. If you don't search, you will not find anything. So when Enrico Fermi said, "Where is everybody?" It's just like a single person staying at home and saying, I don't have a partner because I don't see anyone around me. But guess what? In order to find a partner, you need to go to dating sites. You cannot stay at home. You need to look for others. And that's what I'm doing with my scientific research, searching for the evidence. The evidence will not fall in our lap. We have to search for it, and it's part of science, and it's exciting to the public. And I get funded by private donations. You see, I'm not taking money out of other projects in science. So I think it's actually remarkable that there is this subject that the public cares about, and that is a fundamental question that can change the future of humanity, and that we can address using the scientific method. I published my diary in medium.com over the past 2 weeks during the expedition, and there were more than 2 million people that read them. because they were translated to Spanish as well by in Spain, and so I received a lot of emails from people who told me that for the first time they see how science is done and how science can be exciting. And I hope that many young people will be attracted to pursue science as a result of seeing that.
Could it be possible that by the time we find technological evidence of their extraterrestrial origin, the civilization that launched them will have already disappeared?
Oh, definitely, because with the chemical rockets that we are using, for example, we sent out Voyager 1 and 2, Pioneer 10 and 11, and New Horizons. We sent them to interstellar space, and within 10,000 years, they will exit the solar system. Obviously, they can travel for 1 billion years before they collide with another planet. And they will not be functional anymore. They would appear as a meteor in the atmosphere of that planet. And in 1 billion years, we might not exist because the sun will burn up the surface of the earth. It will boil off all the oceans. So it's quite possible that the senders of whatever we find are not around anymore. But that's the beauty of this method of finding objects like packages in your mailbox. You don't need the sender to be alive when you receive a package in your mailbox. It's very different from listening to radio signals, the traditional way of pursuing extraterrestrial intelligence, because there you need the sender to be active when you are listening. It's just like waiting for a phone call. Here we are looking for packages in our mailbox. We don't need the sender to be alive in order to find them.
What are your thoughts on the recent news about fast radio bursts, or FRBs, which often generate a lot of excitement due to the peculiar nature of these signals? Are they somewhat comparable to the wow signal from the 1970s for our time?
Well, the difference is that we know, at least for some fast radio bursts, we know that they seem to originate from the edge of the universe. And I actually wrote a scientific paper shortly after this fact was recognized. The distance scale was pinned down for some fast radio bursts, and they calculated how much energy is needed if a civilization is using radio waves to, for example, propel a light sail, a ship of giant dimensions. And it turns out that you need more energy than the energy intercepted by the Earth from the sun, afforded that much. And so it needs to be a very advanced civilization if that were the origin. But the most popular view is that those fast radio bursts come from neutron stars that are newly born. We don't know for sure if that's the case. We know that some of the bursts have properties that are similar to what you expect from neutron star environments, but some have different properties. And it could be a mixed bag. But I think that we should be open-minded to all possibilities until we pin down the nature of the engine, the central engine of these fast radio bursts. And it's possible that a small minority of them is technological in origin. So we just have to be patient and get more evidence about the nature of the source.
In your latest book, Interstellar, The Search for Extraterrestrial Life and Our Future in the Stars, which we are eagerly anticipating in Spain, you seem to raise transcendental questions about how to prepare ourselves for a possible interaction with an interstellar extraterrestrial civilization, or more importantly, how our species could become interstellar. Could you give us a preview of the book?
Well, in my mind, it's if we discover that we have a partner far away, or even if we don't, but we engage in the search and imagine that we have a partner out there, it will change us. And just think about your personal life when you met a partner, how it changed your approach to life and your perspective about your goals in life. And for humanity, it will be much more important because right now we are focusing on conflicts here on Earth. And I did a calculation that if you take the amount of money that we currently spend on military budgets, it's about $2 trillion every year worldwide. If you were to allocate that to space exploration, if we were to listen to the words of John Lennon, who said, imagine all the people living in peace, if we took that seriously, we would have a surplus of $2 trillion a year that we could allocate to sending probes to other stars. And I calculated that within the end of this century, we could send a probe to every star in the Milky Way galaxy if we only decided to, instead of killing each other or protecting us from others trying to kill us, if we were to send the probes to other stars, we could pretty much send one for every star, billions of them. And if we can do that, someone else may have done it already. And I think it could give us an inspiration. And, I think it would bring humanity to a better state that, it will represent a higher intelligence. On the boat, when I was there near Papua New Guinea on this Silver Star ship, there was also a filming crew. And I jog every morning at sunrise. And one morning they decided to film me. And so they put a drone that took pictures of me jogging on the boat. And at the end, the director of the documentary asked me, "It looks like you're running. Are you running away from something or are you running towards something?" And I said, both. I'm running away from my colleagues who are not encouraging innovation and not encouraging new knowledge. They are pushing back against doing the kind of research that I'm pursuing. And I'm running towards a higher intelligence in outer space.
We cannot resist asking you for your opinion on the recent news about the creation of an expert committee convened by NASA to investigate UFOs, or as they now refer to them, UAPs. Do you think it might help clarify the origin of these mysterious objects? Do you believe they have anything to do with extraterrestrial visits?
Well, actually, I inspired this committee because I wrote a white paper to the head of science at NASA 2 years ago suggesting to establish such a committee, and they followed my advice. But they didn't put me on the committee because I already established the Galileo project and they wanted this committee to be independent. And so, they looked at the unclassified data. And I also know the unclassified data. It's not convincing. So this committee came up with conclusions that are not surprising. Basically, what they recommend is similar to what the Galileo project is already doing. Okay, so they give a sort of justification, a formal justification to what the Galileo project is doing. And in a way, I follow Oscar Wilde, who said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So I'm happy that they are recommending what we have already been doing in the Galileo project for 2 years. But the most interesting data may be classified, and they didn't have access to that. And we hear stories from the government that perhaps they have some interesting classified information. I don't know if it's real or not because I've never seen the actual data that the government has. But hopefully we will know in the coming months or years. And if the US government has interesting data, then I would be very interested in analyzing it. But at the moment, I'm not waiting for them. I'm collecting my own data.
What is your opinion on Dr. Gary Nolan's claims regarding the possible presence of extraterrestrials on Earth? Do you think, as Dr. Nolan suggests, that the UAPs seen by pilots could be unmanned extraterrestrial spacecraft?
It could be, but we need to get better data because it's not convincing at the moment. And that's why I established the observatory that we have at Harvard, and we'll make copies of it. We are currently planning 5 copies in different locations to survey the sky. And I think most of the objects that were classified as unidentified anomalous phenomena, most of them have simple explanations. They could be natural objects or they could be human-made objects like drones, balloons, aircraft. But there might be 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 that is unusually different. And that's what we are looking for in the Galileo project. And it's sufficient to have 1 that is extraterrestrial for this to make a huge difference. So in difference from the US government, which is focused on national security, they have to worry about all the objects. We have to look just for the ones that are not human-made. I don't care about birds. If we have data on birds, I'll be glad to give it to zoologists. I don't care about anything that says made in China on it. I would be happy to deliver that data to Washington, D.C. All I care about is something that looks not from this earth. And for now, we haven't seen that evidence as of yet.
Lastly, do you believe that there should be any changes in the approaches that governments worldwide take towards exploration to accelerate the progress in the search of extraterrestrial civilizations?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that the subject was suppressed in the past, that there was not much research on it, was the stigma, the fact that people did not take it seriously. And through my scientific research, I tried to bring it to the realm of the mainstream and getting data to guide us, evidence. And my hope is that this will inspire the government, if it has data, to release it, and also other scientists to get engaged. In following the recommendations of the NASA committee and other interest groups, perhaps people will follow me. And altogether, I do notice a shift. But frankly, I'm doing what I'm doing because it makes sense, and I follow common sense. Common sense is not common, but my hope is that more and more people will get engaged in the scientific research on that subject, and also that we might figure out what this meteor is about, and if it happens to be technological, that I think will change everything.
Professor Loeb, it's been a pleasure talking to you. If you'd like, when your book is published in Spain, we will talk to you again to present it to the public.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.